This is what we made in the previous tutorial. So, as you remember, we created a hub for properties and a hub for the game. We can choose our pet and we can choose its age and its name. Every day we have from 2 to 3 choices, and we have a selection of 4 different items to buy. But Windows Forms is very outdated. Therefore, we will use a newer and supported technology called WPF, IDEST Windows Presentation Foundation. We will select the .NET Framework version. As you see, the designing process in WPF is more advanced. Some news for you. The designer is hardly ever used in WPF. Instead, we will mostly write our design in XAML, IDEST Extensible Application Markup Language, similar to HTML or XML. I assume that you already have at least a little experience with WPF and XAML. If not, watch my video about XAML basics, not to be at a loss. In our Windows Forms project, we used only one window to host both the properties and the game. It also lacks a starting window from which you can start the game, change game settings, or exit the game. In WPF, we are going to have 3 distinct parts: the main menu, the pet selection screen, and the game screen. But this does not mean that we are going to use 3 windows. Frankly speaking, in WPF, the fewer windows are used, the better. Instead, one or a few windows host special controls, called user controls. So, we will switch user controls inside Windows, not Windows themselves. Since we will migrate from Windows Forms, I will use the Windows Forms approach to writing code for some time, before we start using more complicated things like binding and converters or separate the view from logic. Although we will migrate, we will move chronologically during the process. So we will create the main menu, then pet selection, and finally the game. But first, let's not forget to set an icon for our game. Let's also not forget to set the assembly version for this game. Let's see what our window looks like by default. Right now, Pet looks like a program, not a game, mainly because of the window frame and system buttons. So let's start by customizing the main window. We will start maximized, so that it looks more like a game. And we also need to increase the default font size. I took a special font which will be used throughout the game. You can download it following the link in the description. If you wonder why we write back, colon, and so on, then don't. We have to. Just remember that this is how you access files as resources. Also, let's set the button style, which will be applied to all buttons within our main window. This will save us a lot of time during the development. Now we will create a user control for the main menu. In our Windows code, we need to set this user control as the content of the window. The background of this user control will be white. In our main menu, we will have a background image. Again, you can get the image following the GitHub link. Now let's create an outer border. The background image will be in the background property of this border. Let's make a safe zone that our controls should not occupy. We will set margin on the border. Now let's create a grid inside the border with 2 columns and 3 rows. In the first row, we will have text with the name of the game. Instead of label, you should prefer text block in WPF. Next, we are going to make buttons and place images with our pets against each of them. So we will need a grid with 2 columns. All buttons will be in one border and all images will be in the other border. Let's use a linear gradient brush for this border. I plan to have about 5 buttons, so let's create a grid with 5 rows. Now we need to place 5 buttons in appropriate rows. This will be our play button. This will be our options button. The third one will be credits. The last but one will be version. And the last one should be exit. We can change the content of buttons later if we need to. Every button should be large enough to be readable. Instead of changing each button's margin, height, and font size, let's just create a style for buttons in the border resources. Now let's make the other border. We need to add some space between borders. We will do it via grid resources. For this border, I will use a linear gradient brush with 3 colors. This one should have 5 rows as well. This is where our pet images will be placed. For pet pictures, we will use a control called image. Let's set the common style for all images. We will also create a special style with the key for just these 5 images. Let's apply this style using the key. Below the 2 borders, we will create another one to inform players who the game is developed by. For this border, we will use a mostly orange linear gradient brush. Inside this border, we will place a text block. Now let's place a hyperlink inside this text block. I linked the hyperlink to my YouTube channel, IDIST this channel. Before we continue, there is one problem that we need to fix. Because we moved our main window to the Windows folder, we need to update the startup path. Let's change the style of hyperlinks to remove the HTML look. Using style triggers, you can change properties under certain conditions. We will allow players to hide this orange border with the link if they want to. So let's give the border a name. As in every game, players should know what version of the game they are playing. Let's create a text block in the bottom left corner. Give it a name because we will set the text from code. Let's check whether our window indeed has this user control as its content. It does. Next we will start coding. First of all, let's set the game version on the start. We will write our code in the constructor after initialization. This code will get executed when the user control is created. First, we need to get the current version from the executing assembly. Then we need to set the version to the text property of the bottom left text block. Let's check. Now let's create the second screen where players will select a pet. We will get here by clicking the play button. Set a click event for the play button. Again, change the content to the new user control. Let's check whether this transition works as well. Good. Next, we will make a window for options. I specifically want it to be not replaced by a user control, so I use a window. Set a click event for the options button. Here we need to create a window and show it. Let's check how it works. Now we will set a click event for the credits button. In code, we need to check the current visibility of border creators and either collapse it or show. Unlike hidden, collapsed option not only hides the control, but also removes the space it occupies. Let's look how it works. Okay, we just urgently have to code the exit button. Now let's create a click event for the version button. To make our hyperlink work, we need to set its request navigate event. We need to start a process and then handle the event. It is time that we started the actual migration. We will begin with the pet selection screen. You should understand two things. First, you cannot use the design of Windows Forms directly in WPF, because WPF uses XAML, while Windows Forms creates controls dynamically from designer code files written in C#. Second, you can use the C# code we wrote in Windows Forms in WPF, but with changes here and there. Luckily, we don't have much in the pet selection hub in Windows Forms, so we can easily recreate and even improve it. So when this user control appears, we need to get the current number of wins. Let's leave it empty for now. Our screen will consist of all the same controls. In addition, we will have a big title at the top, so we need a grid with 2 rows. Let's make a light green border containing text. We will put a stack panel inside of it first to add inner margin. And here will be our bold text block. The rest of the grid will be occupied by the properties box. We need a row for description, a row for pets, a row for ages, and a row for the name, so 4 rows. In addition to game goal, we need to show game statistics, so let's use a stack panel. We can use one text block to both set the goal and explain the rules using line breaks. Below we will place statistics and buttons for changing it. We will need a grid with 3 columns. The first button will add wins, so it will be collapsed by default. At the center we will place a text block showing the number of wins. We also had a button to erase statistics. Let's make a button having the image of trash bin inside of it. I used Aliast to make the image look a bit sharper. Next we will create a group box for pets. Let's make a fancy group box header similar to the top one, but orange. Now let's cover all next controls inside the wrap panel. Unlike stack panel, wrap panel can create additional rows or columns if elements cannot fit in one row or column. Each pet choice will be a stack panel of 3 elements: a border with an image of a pet inside of it, a radio button, and a text block with the description. Since we will have 5 stack panels, let's create a key style for them. This will make some space from both sides. Let's apply this style. Now we need a border for the image. And we will place the first image inside this border. Let's put a puppy image. Below the border, we will place a radio button. The problem with this radio button is that it looks kind of boring to kids. Luckily, I found someone's radio button fancy style a few years ago. Still, I feel that it's better to just recreate it. Let's add it to our resources. In order to change the structure of standard controls, you need to modify the template property. The template should consist of a control template, which we will change. The absolutely necessary element for a radio button is bullet decorator. We will set the cursor to hand when it's over the bullet decorator. Below will be a text element, but as always cover it inside a border. We are going to use overlaying elements next. To achieve this, just utilize a grid with one row and column. I just create a grid. In order to represent the content property, we need a control called content presenter. Because the whole border is the switching element, you don't need a bullet now. But it's still nice to have a visual colorful mark on the left. Let's edit the background of the outer border to make it less white. The control template can have its own triggers. Let's make the radio mark blue when the radio button is checked. And also collapse it when the radio button is disabled. Well, that's it for the control template. We also need a text block to describe the pet. The puppy will have no effect. The first tag panel is finished. Now we can duplicate it and make a few changes. For example, we will need to give next tag panels names to unlock the main code. The next tech panels should be similar to this one. Now all 5 page choices are inside the wrap panel. The pet group box is finished. Let's move on to the age group box. Below we will create a grid for the name box and a few buttons. Here we will have a button to start the game, button to restart, button to go to the main menu, and a button to exit the game. So we need a grid with 4 rows. Every control accepting content can be greatly modified just because of the arbitrary content passed to it. Let's place a grid inside the button to show both an image and text. When you write text between angle brackets, it is equivalent to filling a text block into the content of the control and setting its text. We have finished recreating the design of the properties box from Windows Forms. In addition, we have added much more pleasant view to every control. Coding will be a lot easier because we can copy the code from the Windows Forms project and change it for this WPF project as needed. We will copy a piece by piece from here to the WPF project, but we need to remember to separate pet selection from the game. Let's begin with the loaded event. Let's add wins setting of type int to the project. daily messages are not used during path selection. So let's remove the array list and the while loop. Now let's move the line where we assign the number of wins to the text of a control. We will add another setting called default name of type string. Let's make a region for the constructor and the loaded event. Let's create a region for variables. Now let's copy variables mentioned in the path selection process from Windows Forms. Now let's create a region for secondary buttons like Restart, Main Menu, and Exit. We can also make a subregion for Restart. Now let's copy the code from the Add Win button. And of course, we need to code the Erase button. Next, we will code the checked event for ageChoice. Let's give it a meaningful name. Here we need to make a couple of changes. First, instead of event arcs, WPF requires rooted event arcs. Second, our radio button is called ageChoice1. Third, in WPF, radio buttons have the isChecked property instead of checked. Finally, we use a text block in this project instead of a label. Also, let's remove the odd space before the % character. You may wonder why we haven't added this event to our radio buttons in XAML. That's because if set in XAML, for strange reasons in WPF radio buttons immediately fire the checked event. To resolve this, we can add these events in the constructor. Another difference in WPF is that radio buttons have a checked event instead of checked changed. At last, let's code the Start button. Let's copy the code from Windows Forms. Here we will need to make a lot of changes and remove unnecessary code. In addition, we are going to pass the description to the game user control. Let's create a user control for the game. We need to modify its constructor to accept the necessary parameters from pet selection. Now let's set the content to user control game. Let's check whether everything works. In the next part of the tutorial, we will finish migrating to WPF. All that is left is to convert the game half of the Windows Forms project to WPF. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to see more tutorials.